Today I'm going to be doing a bass guitar shootout, and I'm going to be playing on one of the funkiest tracks ever recorded, Michael Jackson's PYT. Now there's one key feature that sets these two basses apart, and I'm going to be revealing this shortly. Now I've made quite a few videos on the channel before about these basses, particularly the Squier or the Fenders and the Sires, and a lot of the time the question that I get asked is about the pickup spacing, particularly on these 60s and 70s models, because there is a difference, and this difference is really key. So on the 60s jazz bass, as you can see, the back pickup is a little bit closer to the neck pickup. It's not quite as far back as you get on the 70s style instrument. And this is one of the features that makes the bass sound so different. Having that pickup a little bit further back gives you a little bit more growl, a little bit more brilliance, sparkle, and you might want to consider this when you're buying your first budget bass. Do you want the 70s sound or do you want the 60s sound? Now I'm going to play through the track. I'm going to start off with a little bit of soloing on each bass, then I'm going to go straight in with the groove and play the Squier, then the Sire, etc., with both pickups fully open so you can hear how the bass sounds with the tone all the way up as well, kind of that very round standard setting for a jazz bass. And then I'm going to turn off the neck pickup on both of the basses completely so you can hear how the bridge pickup sounds soloed with the 60s and the 70s spacing. So which bass did you prefer on PYT? Did you like the warm 60s thump or the 70s growl? Let me know down in the comments section. Now an example of a player that uses the 60s and the 70s jazz bass would be Jaco Pastorius for the 60s jazz bass, and he often used just the bridge pickup, and you can hear that he gets a very kind of barky sound, but because it's not super far back, it still has some warmth. And then Marcus Miller, of course, uses the 70s style jazz bass, and he really gets that snap, and when he does play just with the back pickup, he does get that very kind of nasally, kind of raspy sound that is very popular amongst bassists as well. So we've talked about the pickup spacing, but what are the other differences between a 60s and a 70s style jazz bass? Well, the other difference is the neck. Typically the 60s jazz basses have very thin necks, and this one does. This is like a modern C shape for a 4-string jazz bass. And on the 70s, the Sire V7 vintage bass, Fender would call this like a U-shaped neck, and you particularly notice this at the first fret where there's a little bit more depth. Now, does this contribute to the sound? It possibly adds a little bit of tone density, maybe, it's hard to tell, but they do feel nice to play actually, they're quite comfortable. However, some people might prefer the super slim neck of the 60s jazz bass. Now 60s jazz basses also typically have darker woods for the fingerboard. On this Squier Jazz Bass we have an Indian laurel fretboard, and the body is made out of poplar, and this bass is a nice lightweight bass. And the Sire V7 Vintage has a swamp ash body and a maple fretboard and neck, and that bass is a little bit heavier in weight over the Squier. 70s jazz bass tend to come in both rosewood, maple, ebony, and this gives you a little bit more of a range of woods to choose from with the 70s jazz basses, and it does tend to give you a little bit more of a brighter sound if you're choosing maple or ebony. Visually, on the 60s jazz basses we tend to have small mother of pearl dots, as you can see, or abalone dots, and on the 70s models we tend to have the blocks. So again, you might have a visual preference over the dots or the blocks. Now in the demo I'm using both of these basses in passive mode for a fair comparison, but if we talk about the Squier first, this is a passive jazz bass, very simple to use. We've got volume for neck pickup, volume for bridge pickup, and then we've got the tone control at the bottom. Simple to use, but maybe a little bit more limited than the Sire, which if you do engage the 18 volt preamp, which is super powerful by the way, you do have the option to sculpt your EQ, and you've got control over the lows, the mids and the highs. The Sire also has a tone control that works in active and passive mode, and I wanted to point this out because this is a really useful tool and not all basses have this option. Thank you for watching, and if you've enjoyed the video, check out my gear and reviews playlist right here.